The autumn wind scattered golden leaves across the dusty platform of Red Fork Station as Daisy Larson clutched her worn valise with trembling fingers, watching the last passenger disembark from the train that had carried her across half the continent. No one remained to greet her no future husband, no representative, not even a message explaining his absence. The year was 1878, and at 22 years old, Daisy had gambled everything on a newspaper advertisement that promised a respectable marriage to a cattle rancher in Wyoming territory. 3 letters exchanged, a daguerreotype sent, and her meager savings spent on a one-way ticket west had led her to this moment of crushing realization. She stood alone, abandoned in a town she'd never heard of until 6 weeks ago. Last call for boarding. The conductor shouted, eyeing Daisy with a mixture of impatience and pity. "Train continues to Cheyenne in 5 minutes, miss." "I'm waiting for someone," Daisy said, her Boston accent marking her as clearly as a sign around her neck might have. She straightened her simple blue traveling dress, smoothing invisible wrinkles while scanning the nearly empty platform for the 10th time. The station master, a graying man with spectacles perched on his nose, approached with a sympathetic expression. "You wouldn't be Miss Larson, would you?" "Waiting on a Mr. Harrington," Daisy's heart leapt. "Yes, has he sent word? Is he delayed?" The station master's face fell. "I'm afraid I have some unpleasant news, miss. Mr. Harrington was in yesterday drinking at the saloon. He and his friends were. Well, they were laughing about a joke they played. Seems he never intended to marry anyone. Just wanted to see if he could get some Eastern girl to come all this way for nothing." The blood drained from Daisy's face. The station master continued awkwardly. "I'm sorry to be the bearer of such news, miss. If you'd like, I can help you arrange passage back east on tomorrow's train." Tears welled in Daisy's eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. She had spent every penny she had on this journey. There was nothing to return to in Boston, no family since her father's death, no position after the textile mill had closed. "I don't have funds for a return ticket," she admitted quietly. The station master looked pained. "There's a women's boarding house in town, but I must warn you, the employment opportunities for a lady in Red Fork are limited." The train whistle blew, signaling imminent departure. The platform vibrated with the engine's power, and black smoke billowed overhead. In that moment of despair, Daisy heard it hoofbeats, pounding hard and fast, and then a man's voice carrying over the train's mechanical groaning. "Daisy Larson. Miss Daisy Larson." She turned toward the sound, shading her eyes against the setting sun. A rider approached at breakneck speed, his horse's flanks lathered with sweat. The cowboy reined his mount sharply at the edge of the platform, leaping down before the animal had fully stopped. "Miss Larson." He was breathless, tall and lean, with sun-browned skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. Dust covered his denim trousers and faded red shirt. His dark hat was pushed back, revealing hair the color of wheat fields. "I'm Daisy Larson," she said cautiously. "Luke Lancaster," he replied, extending a calloused hand which she hesitantly took. "I'm afraid there's been a terrible misunderstanding. James Harrington is my foreman, and what he's done is unconscionable. I've only just discovered his deception." The train whistle screamed again, more insistently. The conductor shouted a final warning. Luke Lancaster spoke quickly. "Miss Larson, I know this isn't what you expected, and you have every right to take that train and go. But if you'd allow me to explain and make amends for my employee's reprehensible behavior, I would be most grateful." Daisy looked from the train to the cowboy, indecision warring within her. The station master cleared his throat. "Miss, you need to decide now." The conductor was already climbing aboard, doors slamming behind him. Daisy closed her eyes briefly, summoning the courage that had carried her this far from home. "Mr. Lancaster," she said finally, "I believe I'll hear what you have to say." Relief washed over Luke's face. He nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Miss Larson. My ranch is a few hours' ride from here. I've arranged a room for you at Mrs. Tillman's boarding house in town tonight. Tomorrow, if you're willing, I'd like to discuss how to right this wrong." As the train pulled away in a cloud of steam and cinders, Daisy watched her last connection to her old life disappear around the bend. She turned back to Luke Lancaster, studying his face for any sign of deception like that which had brought her to this dusty Wyoming town. "Mr. Lancaster," she said with quiet dignity, "I appreciate your intervention, but I must know why would you trouble yourself over a stranger who was tricked by your employee?" Luke's expression darkened. "Because I believe in honesty and decency, Miss Larson. And because I know what it's like to be betrayed by someone you trusted." He offered a small, genuine smile. "Also, my sister would skin me alive if she knew I'd left a lady stranded at a train station." Despite herself, Daisy felt a smile tug at her lips. "I believe I would like your sister." "Most people do," Luke agreed, gathering the reins of his horse. "Now, if you'll allow me to escort you to Mrs. Tillman's, I believe she's preparing supper. You must be famished after your journey." The boarding house proved to be a neat, two-story clapboard building with lace curtains and geraniums in the window boxes. Mrs. Tillman herself was a robust widow in her 50s who welcomed Daisy with surprising warmth. "Any friend of Luke Lancaster is welcome here," she declared, showing Daisy to a small but clean room on the second floor. "That man saved my Samuel when he fell down the old mine shaft 2 winters ago. Rode through a blizzard to fetch the doctor." After Mrs. Tillman left, Daisy sat on the edge of the narrow bed, finally allowing the tears to come. Everything she had planned, all her dreams of a new beginning, had been nothing but a cruel prank, and now she was dependent on the charity of strangers. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Tillman's voice came through the door. "Supper's ready, dear, and Mr. Lancaster asked me to give you this." Daisy opened the door to find the landlady holding an envelope. Inside was a brief note and several band notes. "Miss Larson," the note read in a firm, clear hand, "please accept this as an advance against any future arrangements we might make. Whether you choose to stay or return east, you should not be without means. I will call for you at 10 tomorrow morning if that is convenient. Respectfully, L. Lancaster." Daisy stared at the money enough for a train ticket home and then some. Her pride warred with practicality. Finally, she tucked the envelope into her pocket and followed Mrs. Tillman downstairs, where the aroma of beef stew and fresh bread momentarily pushed aside her worries. The next morning dawned clear and crisp. Daisy had slept surprisingly well in the small but comfortable room, lulled by the unfamiliar sounds of the western night coyotes calling in the distance, the occasional hoot of an owl, the wind sighing through cottonwood trees. She dressed carefully in her second-best dress, a moss green that complemented her hazel eyes, and pinned her chestnut hair into a neat chignon. Precisely at 10, there was a knock at the boarding house door. Luke Lancaster stood on the porch, hat in hand, dressed more formally than the day before in a clean shirt and waistcoat, his boots polished. "Good morning, Miss Larson," he said, his deep voice resonating with sincerity. "I hope you rested well." "I did, thank you," Daisy replied, trying to maintain a proper distance despite her curiosity about this man who had ridden to her rescue. "I thought perhaps we might walk to the cafe for coffee while we talk," Luke suggested, offering his arm. The main street of Red Fork was bustling with morning activity, freight wagons being loaded, shopkeepers sweeping boardwalks, cowboys leading horses to the livery. Daisy felt the stares of the townspeople and held her head high, though her cheeks burned with embarrassment. Surely everyone knew she was the fool who had been tricked by James Harrington. The cafe was small but clean, with checkered curtains and the aroma of fresh coffee. Once they were seated at a corner table, Luke came directly to the point. "Miss Larson, I want to be completely honest with you about what happened. James Harrington has been my foreman for 3 years. He's good with cattle but has always had a mean streak when drinking. It seems he and some of the other hands thought it would be amusing to place that advertisement in your Boston newspaper." "I see," Daisy said stiffly. "And you had no knowledge of this?" Luke's gray eyes met hers directly. "None. I was in Cheyenne for the past month, settling a legal matter concerning water rights. I returned yesterday and overheard Harrington boasting about his prank at the saloon. He's been dismissed from my employ, effective immediately." Daisy's fingers twisted her handkerchief beneath the table. "That doesn't change my situation, Mr. Lancaster." "No," Luke agreed, "it doesn't, which is why I'd like to make you a proposition." Daisy stiffened, immediately wary. Luke seemed to realize how his words might be interpreted and hastily continued. "A business proposition, Miss Larson. My ranch, the Double L, is prosperous but lacking in certain refinements. My sister Lucy managed the household until her marriage last spring. Since then, we've been without a proper housekeeper or someone to maintain the accounts." He paused as the waitress brought coffee and slices of apple pie. When she departed, Luke continued, "I'm offering you a position as my ranch administrator. You'd have your own cabin on the property, a fair salary, and the respect due to a lady in my employ. If, after a reasonable period, you find the position or the territory not to your liking, I'll personally fund your return to Boston or anywhere else you choose to go." Daisy studied him over her coffee cup. "Why would you offer such a position to someone you just met?" "You know nothing of my abilities or character." Luke smiled slightly. "On the contrary, Miss Larson, your letters to Harrington, which he foolishly left in the bunkhouse, revealed a woman of intelligence, education, and determination. You mentioned working as a bookkeeper at your father's mercantile before his passing and managing accounts at the textile mill. Those are precisely the skills the Double L needs." Daisy felt a flicker of hope, but remained cautious. "And what of my reputation?" "A single woman living on a ranch with unmarried men. You would have your privacy and independence," Luke assured her. "The cabin is separate from the main house and the bunkhouse. Mrs. Tillman's niece, Sarah, works as our cook and would be company for you. And I assure you, any man who showed you disrespect would answer to me." The intensity in his gray eyes as he made this declaration caused Daisy to look down at her coffee. "I need time to consider your offer, Mr. Lancaster." "Of course," he replied. "Take today to think it over. If you decide to accept, I'll return tomorrow to escort you to the ranch. If not, I'll still ensure you have funds to travel wherever you wish." After Luke departed, Daisy spent the afternoon walking through the small town, weighing her options. Red Fork was no Boston, but it had a general store, a dressmaker's shop, a small school, and even a lending library in the back of the church. The people she encountered were curious but not unkind, and several women greeted her warmly when Mrs. Tillman introduced her. By evening, Daisy had made her decision. The West offered what Boston could not: a fresh start and independence she could never achieve in the East. Luke Lancaster seemed honorable, and his offer was fair. She would accept the position, at least temporarily. The next morning, Daisy packed her few belongings and wrote a brief note accepting Luke's offer. Mrs. Tillman insisted on preparing a basket of food for their journey. "The Double L is a good place. the older woman assured her. Luke Lancaster is the finest man in the territory, though don't tell him I said so. His head's big enough already. Luke arrived driving a sturdy wagon rather than riding horseback. He loaded Daisy's trunk and helped her climb onto the seat, treating her with a respect she found reassuring. As they left town, the vast Wyoming landscape opened before them, rolling prairies stretching to distant mountains, the October sun painting the grasslands in shades of gold and amber. Despite her lingering apprehension, Daisy felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. "It's beautiful," she murmured, almost to herself. Luke glanced at her, his expression softening. "It grows on you. I came west after the war, looking for somewhere to start fresh. Never intended to stay, but now I can't imagine living anywhere else." "You fought in the war?" Daisy asked, curious about this man who had upended her plans, yet possibly saved her from disaster. "Union cavalry," Luke replied, his tone suggesting he didn't often discuss it. "Enlisted at 18. Came home to Pennsylvania to find my parents dead from influenza and the family farm sold for taxes." "I'm sorry," Daisy said quietly. "My mother died when I was small. My father raised me alone until his heart gave out 3 years ago." Luke nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Loss shapes us, doesn't it? But it doesn't have to define us." They traveled for several hours, the conversation flowing more easily than Daisy would have expected. Luke pointed out landmarks, spoke of the harsh winter they'd endured the previous year, and asked thoughtful questions about her life in Boston. Not once did he make her feel foolish for having been deceived by his former foreman. By mid-afternoon they crested a rise, and Luke reined the horses to a stop. "There it is," he said, a note of pride in his voice. "The Double L." Below them stretched a verdant valley cradling a creek lined with cottonwoods. A substantial 2-story house of hewn logs stood near the water, with several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn nearby. In the distance, cattle grazed on the rolling grassland. "It's larger than I expected," Daisy admitted as they descended into the valley. "Started with just 20 acres and a dozen cattle," Luke said. "Now it's 4,000 acres and over 500 head. Took 8 years of back-breaking work and more than a few sleepless nights worrying over drought and rustlers." As they approached the ranch, a young woman with blonde hair emerged from the main house, waving enthusiastically. "That's Sarah," Luke explained, "Mrs. Tillman's niece. She's been anxious to meet you." Sarah Tillman proved to be a cheerful girl of 19 with a round face and capable hands. She welcomed Daisy warmly and immediately offered to show her to the cabin that would be her new home. The cabin was small but solidly built, with a front porch facing the creek. Inside was a main room with a stone fireplace, a small bedroom, and a lean-to kitchen at the back. Someone had filled a vase with wildflowers and laid a colorful quilt on the narrow bed. "Luke had the men air it out yesterday and bring in firewood," Sarah explained. "The nights get cold early this time of year. Come up to the main house when you're settled. I've got a roast in the oven, and the men will be in from the range soon for supper." Left alone, Daisy sank onto a rocking chair by the fireplace, overwhelmed by the day's events. A week ago, she had been in Boston, preparing to marry a man she knew only through letters. Now she was in Wyoming territory, employed by a rancher she had met just 2 days before. The absurdity of it all brought unexpected laughter bubbling up from somewhere deep inside her. Perhaps this was what freedom felt like, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Supper that evening introduced Daisy to the ranch hands, 8 men of varying ages who eyed her curiously, but respectfully. Luke had clearly instructed them on proper behavior. As they all removed their hats and spoke politely, if awkwardly, welcoming her to the Double L. Over the following days, Daisy settled into her new role. The ranch's account books were in disarray, and she found satisfaction in bringing order to the chaos. Luke had been running the operation largely by memory and scribbled notes, a system that worked for him but would be incomprehensible to anyone else. "What happens if you're injured or away on business?" Daisy asked one afternoon as they reviewed the quarterly cattle sales. "No one would know which suppliers need to be paid or which accounts are outstanding." Luke looked surprised, as if this had never occurred to him. "I suppose you're right. My sister used to say something similar." "Smart woman, your sister," Daisy replied with a smile. "Lucy always was the sensible one," Luke agreed. "She married a shopkeeper in Cheyenne. They're expecting their first child this winter." As October gave way to November, Daisy found herself increasingly comfortable at the Double L. Her cabin became a home, with small touches reflecting her personality: books borrowed from the church library, a jar of pine cones collected during walks along the creek, a patchwork cushion Sarah had helped her make for the rocking chair. More significantly, she and Luke developed a working relationship based on mutual respect. He valued her suggestions for improving the ranch's operations and seemed genuinely interested in her opinions. For her part, Daisy came to admire his integrity and dedication to the land and people under his care. The first snow fell in mid-November, transforming the landscape into a glittering wonderland. Daisy stood on her porch that morning, watching as the ranch hands went about their chores in the fresh powder, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Luke emerged from the barn, leading his horse, and noticed her watching. He raised a hand in greeting, his smile visible even at a distance. Daisy's heart gave an unexpected flutter, which she immediately tried to dismiss. Luke Lancaster was her employer, nothing more. That he was also handsome, kind, and increasingly frequently in her thoughts was irrelevant. That evening, a fierce blizzard descended on the valley. Daisy huddled by her fireplace, grateful for the substantial woodpile Luke had insisted on establishing beside her cabin. The wind howled around the eaves, and snow pelted the windows like tiny fists demanding entry. She had just stoked the fire when a knock came at the door. Luke stood on her porch, snow coating his hat and shoulders, a lantern in one gloved hand. "Checking to ensure you're warm enough," he explained, stamping snow from his boots. "This storm came in faster than expected." "I'm fine," Daisy assured him, but a particularly violent gust of wind chose that moment to rattle the cabin, making her jump. Luke smiled sympathetically. "First Wyoming blizzard," Daisy nodded, embarrassed by her nervousness. "Is it always this ferocious?" "This is fairly mild," Luke said, then laughed at her expression. "I'm teasing. It's a proper storm, but the cabin is solid. Still, I'd feel better if you came up to the main house until it passes. The men are all in the bunkhouse, and Sarah's worried about you being alone down here." Daisy hesitated, aware of how it might appear if she spent the night in Luke's home, even with Sarah present as chaperone. Luke seemed to read her thoughts. "You'd have Lucy's old room, of course, and I give you my word as a gentleman that your reputation will remain intact." Another blast of wind made the decision for her. Gathering a few essentials, Daisy wrapped herself in her heaviest shawl and followed Luke into the storm. He insisted she take his arm as they trudged through knee-deep snow to the main house, the lantern's glow creating a small sphere of light in the swirling white. The ranch house was blessedly warm, with lamps burning in the windows and the aroma of Sarah's cooking permeating the air. The young woman exclaimed in relief when they entered, fussing over Daisy like a mother hen. "I've heated bricks for your bed," Sarah announced, leading Daisy upstairs to a pleasant room with sloped ceilings and a window seat. And there's hot cider downstairs when you're ready." The three of them spent the evening in the ranch house's comfortable parlor, the blizzard forgotten as they shared stories and laughter. Sarah recounted tales of growing up in Red Fork, while Luke described his early, often comical attempts at ranching. "My first cattle drive, I lost half the herd crossing a river," he admitted, shaking his head at the memory. "Didn't know enough to test the depth first. Nearly drowned myself trying to save a particularly stubborn steer." "How did you learn?" Daisy asked, curled in an armchair with a quilt across her lap. "It seems like ranching requires so many different skills." "Trial and error, mostly," Luke replied. "And neighbors who were willing to help a greenhorn. Old Pete Simmons from the next valley over practically adopted me that first year. Taught me everything from branding to weather prediction." The conversation continued until Sarah, yawning, excused herself to bed. Suddenly aware of being alone with Luke, Daisy made to follow, but he gently asked her to stay a moment longer. "There's something I've been meaning to discuss with you," he said, his expression serious in the lamplight. Daisy's heart quickened. "Yes." Luke leaned forward, clasping his hands between his knees. "You've been here a month now. I was wondering if the position is satisfactory. If you're content to stay through the winter at least." The question wasn't what Daisy had expected, though she couldn't have said what she had anticipated. "I am," she answered truthfully. "More than satisfactory. I've found the work fulfilling and everyone has been kind." Relief washed over Luke's features. "I'm glad to hear it. You've made remarkable improvements already. The ranch ledgers haven't been this organized since, well, ever." "Thank you," Daisy said, feeling a warm glow at his praise. Luke seemed to want to say more, but instead stood and added another log to the fire. "We should both get some rest. Storm or no storm, the cattle still need tending come morning." The blizzard continued for 3 days, forcing Daisy to remain in the main house. She and Sarah prepared meals for the ranch hands, who trudged in from the bunkhouse covered in snow, grateful for hot food and coffee. Luke spent long hours outdoors with his men, ensuring the livestock survived the bitter cold. On the evening of the 3rd day, he failed to return for supper. As darkness fell and the meal grew cold, Daisy's worry increased. The other men had reported that Luke had gone to check on a group of cattle spotted near the north fence line. "Should we send someone to look for him?" Daisy asked Tom Jenkins, the oldest and most experienced of the hands. The weathered cowboy shook his head. "Too dangerous in the dark. Luke knows this land better than any of us. If he can't find his way back, no one can." Daisy paced the parlor until well past midnight, peering anxiously through the frosted windows at the moonlit snow. When the door finally burst open, admitting a blast of frigid air and a snow-covered figure, she gave a cry of relief. Luke staggered in, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. His face was red with cold, his lips almost blue. Without thinking, Daisy rushed to him, helping him remove his frozen outer garments. "What happened?" she demanded, leading him to the fire. "We've been worried sick." Luke's hands were too numb to manage the buttons of his coat, so Daisy did it for him, trying to ignore the impropriety of the situation. "Found a group of yearlings trapped in a ravine," he explained through chattering teeth. "Had to free them one by one. Then Copper threw a shoe on the way back, and I had to walk the last 3 miles. "You could have frozen to death," Daisy scolded, wrapping a quilt around his shoulders. Luke managed a tired smile. "Didn't know you cared so much, Miss Larson." Daisy flushed but didn't back down. "Of course I care. Everyone here depends on you." Something flickered in Luke's eyes, but he merely nodded. "I'll try to be more careful next time." By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the valley transformed into a glistening white expanse under a brilliant blue sky. Luke insisted on escorting Daisy back to her cabin, breaking a path through the deep snow. They walked in companionable silence, their breath forming clouds in the crisp air. At her door, Luke hesitated. "Daisy," he said, the first time he had used her given name, "I want to thank you for your concern last night. It's been a long time since anyone worried about whether I came home." The simple statement touched something deep within her. On impulse, Daisy reached out and squeezed his gloved hand. "Well, get used to it, Mr. Lancaster. I intend to keep this job, which means you need to stay alive to pay my wages." Luke's laughter echoed across the snow-covered yard as he tipped his hat to her and turned back toward the main house. As winter settled over the Double L, life fell into a rhythm dictated by the needs of the cattle and the limitations of the weather. On clear days, Daisy worked in the ranch office, meticulously updating ledgers and correspondence. During storms, she often remained in her cabin, reading or sewing by the fire. Luke made a point of checking on her regularly, sometimes bringing a book he thought she might enjoy or staying for a cup of coffee. These visits became the highlights of Daisy's days, though she tried not to examine too closely the anticipation she felt when she heard his boots on her porch steps. Christmas approached, bringing with it preparations that occupied everyone at the ranch. Sarah organized a baking day, filling the main house with the aromas of gingerbread and apple pie. The men cut a large pine tree from the foothills and erected it in the parlor, which Daisy and Sarah decorated with strings of dried berries, pine cones dipped in wax, and paper stars. Luke disappeared for 2 days, returning from town with the wagon loaded with supplies and mysterious packages. "Christmas shopping" was all he would say when questioned, a secretive smile playing around his mouth. On Christmas Eve, everyone gathered in the ranch house for a feast. The table groaned under platters of roast venison, potatoes, winter vegetables preserved from the fall harvest, and Sarah's fresh bread. Wine flowed freely, and even the most taciturn of the cowboys grew jovial as the evening progressed. After the meal, they exchanged modest gifts: hand-knitted scarves, whittled figurines, jars of preserved fruits. Daisy had made each of the men a new bandana, embroidering their initials in one corner. For Sarah, she had fashioned a pretty collar from lace she'd brought from Boston. For Luke, she had agonized before finally deciding on a leather-bound journal, its pages ready to record the ranch's future. Luke's gift to her came last, a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with red string. Inside was a silver brooch in the shape of a prairie rose, its petals delicately etched. "It's beautiful," Daisy breathed, touching it reverently. "It reminded me of you," Luke said quietly, for her ears alone, "thriving where others might not, bringing beauty to this harsh land." Their eyes met over the small gift, and something unspoken passed between them, something that made Daisy's heart race, and her cheeks flush with warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. The moment was broken when Tom Jenkins began playing his fiddle, and the furniture was pushed back for dancing. Luke extended his hand to Daisy, who hesitated only briefly before accepting. As they moved together to the lively tune, Daisy realized with startling clarity that she was falling in love with Luke Lancaster. The revelation should have frightened her. He was her employer, and she had come west to marry another man entirely. Yet as Luke's hand rested lightly at her waist, guiding her through the dance, all Daisy felt was a sense of rightness, as if the path that had seemed so disastrous at Red Fork Station had led exactly where she was meant to be. January brought harsh cold and heavy snow that confined everyone to the ranch buildings for days at a time. Daisy used the enforced isolation to reorganize the ranch's filing system, and draft a comprehensive inventory of livestock and equipment. Luke spent hours with her in the small office off the main house, discussing plans for spring breeding and potential land acquisitions. Their professional relationship remained proper, but Daisy became increasingly aware of small changes, the way Luke's hand sometimes lingered when passing her documents, how his eyes sought hers across the room during meals, the conversations that stretched late into the evening by the parlor fire. In early February, a brief thaw allowed for more movement around the ranch. Daisy took advantage of the milder weather to walk along the creek, enjoying the sight of sunlight sparkling on the partially thawed water. Lost in thought, she didn't notice Luke approaching until he called her name. "Enjoying the respite from winter?" he asked, falling into step beside her. "Very much," Daisy replied, "though I'm sure it won't last." "No, we'll have more snow before spring truly arrives," Luke agreed. "But these brief thaws remind us that winter isn't eternal, even when it feels that way." They walked in silence for a time, the only sounds their boots crunching on the crusty snow and the gurgle of water beneath the creek's remaining ice. "Daisy," Luke said finally, stopping to face her, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Her heart skipped at his serious tone. "Yes." "When you came west, you were prepared to marry a stranger based on a few letters. May I ask why?" The question surprised her. "I suppose I wanted a different life than what was available to me in Boston. After my father died, I had few options: continue at the mill until my eyesight failed, become a governess if I could find a position, or marry. The advertisement offered independence and purpose, a chance to help build something meaningful." Luke nodded thoughtfully. "Not romance or passion." Daisy felt her cheeks warm. "Those seemed like luxuries I couldn't afford. Practical considerations had to come first." "And now," Luke asked softly, "has your perspective changed?" Daisy met his gaze, trying to read his intentions. "Perhaps. I've learned that practicality and passion needn't be mutually exclusive." Something shifted in Luke's expression. He took a step closer, close enough that Daisy could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. "Daisy, Luke, Miss Larson," Sarah's voice carried across the snow-covered ground. They turned to see the young woman waving frantically from the direction of the main house. "Riders coming. Looks like trouble." Luke immediately shifted from the man who had been about to say something personal to the rancher responsible for his land and people. "Stay here," he instructed Daisy, already striding toward the house. Daisy ignored the command, gathering her skirts and hurrying after him. By the time she reached the yard, 4 men on horseback had arrived, their mounts lathered despite the cold. One of them slumped in the saddle, a makeshift bandage wrapped around his thigh, dark with blood. "Raiders hit the Simmons place," one of the riders reported grimly as Luke helped the wounded man dismount. "Burned the barn, stole most of their stock. Old Pete's dead and his grandson shot." Daisy gasped at the news. Pete Simmons, the very man who had taught Luke so much in his early days of ranching. Luke's face hardened. "How many raiders?" 6 or 7, headed north with about 30 head of cattle. Sheriffs forming a posse in town, but Pete's place is remote. By the time word reached us, they had a good head start. Luke turned to Tom Jenkins, who had emerged from the bunkhouse. "Saddle the horses. Every man who can ride. We leave in 20 minutes. The ranch erupted into activity as men prepared for pursuit. Daisy followed Luke into the house, where he was already buckling on his gun belt and checking his rifle. "Let me tend the wounded man before you go," she said, gathering medical supplies from the cabinet where they were kept. Luke nodded tersely. "Do what you can for him. We'll return as soon as possible." Within the hour, Luke and 6 of his men rode out, heavily armed and provisioned for several days. Daisy and Sarah watched them go, anxiety etching identical lines in their foreheads. "Will they be all right?" Sarah asked in a small voice. Daisy squeezed the younger woman's hand, projecting a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Luke knows what he's doing. They'll be careful." The next 3 days were the longest of Daisy's life. She kept herself busy tending to the wounded rider, whose name was Marcus Simmons, nephew to the murdered rancher. His injury, while painful, wasn't life-threatening, and by the second day he was sitting up and answering Daisy's careful questions about the attack. "They came at dawn," he recounted grimly. "Professional rustlers, not just opportunists, knew exactly what they were doing. Uncle Pete tried to stop them." His voice broke. "I should have been faster, should have gotten to my rifle sooner." "You couldn't have known," Daisy consoled him. "No one expects such violence." Marcus shook his head, eyes haunted. "In this territory, maybe we should." On the third night, as Daisy sat by the fire in the main house, mending one of Luke's shirts more as a distraction than from necessity, hoofbeats approached. She rushed to the door, heart in her throat, to find Luke dismounting wearily in the yard. He looked exhausted, his face wind-burned and stubbled with several days' growth of beard. When he saw Daisy in the doorway, something in his expression softened. "You're back," she said unnecessarily, relief making her voice shake. "Are you hurt? The others?" "No casualties on our side," Luke assured her, removing his hat as he climbed the porch steps. "We caught up to the rustlers near the Montana border. There was a firefight. 2 of them won't trouble anyone again, and the rest scattered. We recovered most of Pete's cattle." Daisy helped him remove his heavy coat, noting how he winced when he moved his right arm. "You are injured," she accused. Luke grimaced. "Just a graze, nothing serious." "Let me be the judge of that," Daisy insisted, leading him to the kitchen where the light was better. She helped him remove his shirt, trying to maintain professional detachment at the sight of his bare chest and shoulders, tanned even in winter and marked with old scars. The wound was indeed a graze, the bullet having cut a shallow furrow across his upper arm. Daisy cleaned it carefully, aware of Luke watching her face as she worked. "I was worried," she admitted quietly, applying a salve to the injury. "Were you?" Luke's voice was equally soft. Daisy met his gaze, abandoning pretense. "Terrified. I kept thinking of all the things I hadn't said to you." Luke's good hand came up to cup her cheek. Such as the fact that I'm falling in love with you," Daisy said, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he must hear it. "And that what started as the worst day of my life at that train station has somehow led to the best months I've ever known." For a moment, Luke stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When Daisy responded, sliding her hands up to his shoulders, the kiss deepened, becoming something neither of them could deny or retreat from. When they finally separated, both breathless, Luke rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since I saw you standing on that platform, looking so brave and lost all at once." "Why didn't you?" Daisy asked, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Because you deserve time," Luke answered simply. "Time to know your own mind, to be sure of your feelings apart from gratitude or circumstance." Daisy smiled, touching his lips with her fingertips. "I am sure, Luke Lancaster, more sure than I've ever been of anything." The following weeks brought dramatic changes to the Double L. With the death of Pete Simmons, his nephew Marcus decided to sell the neighboring ranch rather than run it alone. Luke purchased the additional land, expanding the Double L-Ticas holdings significantly. More personally, Luke and Daisy's relationship blossomed openly. They still maintained propriety. Daisy continued to live in her cabin, and Luke was scrupulously respectful in public, but no one at the ranch could doubt the direction of their affections. As March arrived with its promise of spring, Luke rode to town and returned with Reverend Thomas from the Red Fork Church. That evening he asked Daisy to walk with him to the creek, which was now running freely, ice cracking and melting in the strengthening sun. At a bend in the water, where a large cottonwood spread its bare branches toward the sky, Luke stopped and turned to face her. "Daisy Larson," he said, taking both her hands in his, "when you came west last fall, you were prepared to marry a man you knew only through letters. You were deceived and abandoned, and by rights, you should have turned your back on Wyoming and everyone in it." Daisy smiled. "I'm glad I didn't." "So am I," Luke said fervently, "because it gave me the chance to know you, your strength, your intelligence, your kind heart. I love you, Daisy, and I want to spend my life with you, building this ranch and, God willing, a family." He dropped to one knee in the soft earth by the creek bank, still holding her hands. "Will you marry me, Daisy Larson? Not because you need security or because I need a ranch administrator, but because we love each other and belong together." Tears of joy spilled down Daisy's cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Luke, I will marry you." Luke stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left no doubt of his feelings. When they finally separated, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold ring. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "The only thing I managed to keep after they died." Daisy looked at the ring, then back at Luke's face. "I'll treasure it always." They walked back to the ranch hand in hand, where they found the entire household: Sarah, Tom Jenkins, all the ranch hands, and Reverend Thomas gathered on the porch, waiting expectantly. "She said yes," Luke announced, and a cheer went up from the assembled group. Sarah rushed forward to embrace Daisy. "I knew it," she exclaimed. "From the moment he rode into town shouting your name at the station, I told Aunt Tillman there would be a wedding before summer." Reverend Thomas stepped forward, beaming. "Luke suggested I might be needed for a ceremony today." "I'm prepared to officiate whenever you're ready." Daisy looked at Luke in surprise. "Today? But I have no proper dress." "No, today, next week, next month, whenever you wish," Luke assured her. "I just wanted to be prepared if you didn't want to wait." Daisy considered for only a moment. "I've waited my whole life to find where I belong," she said decisively. "I don't need to wait a day longer." And so, as the sun set over the Wyoming prairie, casting long shadows across the awakening land, Daisy Larson and Luke Lancaster were married on the porch of the Double L. Sarah had hastily fashioned a bouquet of early wildflowers and pine branches. Tom Jenkins played his fiddle while the ranch hands stood as witnesses, all scrubbed and wearing their Sunday best. Daisy wore her finest dress, a deep blue that Luke said matched the evening sky, with the silver prairie rose pinned at her throat. Luke wore a new shirt and his best waistcoat, his hair still damp from washing. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, and Luke kissed his bride to the applause and whoops of their makeshift family, Daisy felt a completeness she had never known before. Later that night, alone in the master bedroom of the main house, Luke held Daisy close in the darkness. "I never expected to find love when I came west," Daisy murmured against his chest. Luke's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "And I never expected to find it shouting a stranger's name at a train station." Daisy laughed softly. "How did you know?" "That day at the station, why did you come for me?" Luke was silent for a moment, considering. "When I overheard Harrington bragging about his cruel joke, I was furious. But when I saw the letters you'd written, your hope, your courage in venturing into the unknown, something changed. I couldn't bear the thought of you standing alone on that platform, betrayed and abandoned. I had to make it right." You did more than make it right, Daisy said, lifting her face to kiss him. You made it perfect. Spring brought new life to the Double L. Calves were born, grass greened across the valley, and the creek ran high with snowmelt from the distant mountains. Daisy moved her belongings into the main house, though she kept the cabin as an office where she continued to manage the ranch accounts with growing expertise. In May, a letter arrived from Luke's sister Lucy in Cheyenne, announcing the birth of her son and expressing delight at her brother's marriage. She invited them to visit as soon as the spring cattle work allowed. "I'd like that," Daisy told Luke as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. "I want to meet the woman who threatened to skin you alive if you left me stranded at that train station." Luke laughed, pulling her closer on the bench they shared. "I may have exaggerated that part slightly." Daisy raised an eyebrow. "So she wouldn't have been angry." "Oh, she would have been furious," Luke assured her. "But Lucy's threats usually involve shooting rather than skinning. She's an excellent marksman." "I like her already," Daisy declared. As summer approached, bringing longer days and the promise of the first haying, Daisy realized with quiet joy that she was expecting a child. She kept the knowledge to herself for several weeks, savoring the secret and waiting for the right moment to share it with Luke. The opportunity came during a rare day of leisure. Luke had suggested a picnic by the creek to celebrate the successful completion of spring branding. They rode to a secluded spot where a natural pool had formed, deep enough for swimming in the summer heat. After they had eaten, Luke lay back on the blanket, hat over his eyes against the bright sunlight. Daisy watched him, marveling at how this man, once a stranger who had ridden to her rescue, was now the center of her world. "Luke," she said softly, "I have something to tell you." He pushed his hat back, squinting up at her. Daisy took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby. Around Christmas, I think." Luke stared at her for a heartbeat, then sat up abruptly, his expression transforming from surprise to wonder. "A baby, you're certain?" Daisy nodded, suddenly anxious. "Are you pleased?" In answer, Luke gathered her into his arms, laughing and crying all at once. "Pleased? Daisy, I'm ecstatic. A child, our child." He kissed her deeply, then drew back to look at her face. "How long have you known?" "A few weeks," Daisy admitted. "I wanted to be sure before I told you." Luke shook his head in amazement. "A baby at Christmas. What a gift." His hand returned to her stomach, protective and gentle. "I'll build a cradle from the cottonwood by your old cabin, and we should convert the small bedroom upstairs into a nursery." Daisy laughed at his enthusiasm. "We have months yet to prepare." "Not nearly enough time," Luke declared, already planning aloud. "We'll need to hire another hand so I can spend more time at the house. And perhaps Sarah's younger sister could come help when the baby arrives." As Luke continued listing all the preparations they would need to make, Daisy watched him with a heart so full, it seemed impossible it wouldn't burst from joy. This was what she had sought without knowing it when she answered that advertisement and boarded the train west, not just security or independence, but love, purpose, and the chance to build a future with a man who valued her as an equal partner. The months passed in a blur of activity. The Double L prospered under their joint management, with Daisy introducing innovations in record-keeping that allowed them to track breeding lines more effectively and maximize profits. Luke expanded the herd and hired additional hands, including Marcus Simmons, who had decided ranching was in his blood after all. Daisy's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though by autumn she found herself tiring more easily. Luke insisted she rest frequently and took over many of her administrative duties, proving himself a quick study under her guidance. In October, Exactly 1 year after Daisy had arrived at Red Fork Station, Luke surprised her with a trip to town. They stayed at Mrs. Tillman's boarding house, where the widow fussed over Daisy's condition and insisted on preparing all her favorite foods. On their second day in Red Fork, Luke suggested they visit the train station. Daisy looked at him curiously, but agreed. The small platform where they had first met looked much the same, though the autumn leaves swirling across the wooden planks were perhaps a different shade of gold. Luke took her hands, his expression tender. 1 year ago today, I rode in here shouting your name, having no idea how completely you would change my life. Daisy smiled, remembering her uncertainty and fear that day. I thought I had made the worst mistake of my life, coming west to marry a man who didn't exist. And now? Luke asked softly. Now I know it was the best decision I ever made, Daisy replied, stretching up to kiss him, even if the path was not what I expected. That night, as they prepared for bed in their room at Mrs. Tillman's, Daisy felt the first sharp pain low in her back. She dismissed it as normal discomfort until another followed minutes later, more intense than the first. Luke, she said, trying to keep her voice steady, I think you should fetch the doctor. Luke's head snapped up, alarm crossing his features. The baby, but it's too early. Not so very early, Daisy reassured him, though anxiety churned within her. Only a few weeks. Dr. Wilson arrived promptly, his manner calm and professional as he examined Daisy. First babies often come on their own schedule, he told them. Everything seems normal, but we'll need to monitor closely given the early timing. The labor progressed steadily through the night. Luke refused to leave Daisy's side, holding her hand through each contraction, wiping her brow, and murmuring encouragement when her strength flagged. As dawn broke over Red Fork, Daisy gave a final push, and their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to Luke's eyes. She's perfect, the doctor declared, placing the swaddled infant in Daisy's arms. Small but strong. Daisy looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled with a dusting of dark hair. Lucy, she said softly, after your sister who would have skinned you alive. Luke laughed through his tears, touching the baby's cheek with a reverent finger. Lucy Daisy Lancaster, perfect. They remained in town for 2 weeks, allowing Daisy to recover her strength before attempting the journey back to the ranch. Mrs. Tillman proved an invaluable help, sharing wisdom from raising her own children and giving the new parents occasional respite to rest. When they finally returned to the Double L, they found the ranch hands had erected a sign over the main gate. Welcome home, little Miss Lancaster. Sarah had prepared the nursery with loving attention to detail. And even Gruff, Tom Jenkins, had whittled a delicate mobile of wooden stars to hang above the cradle Luke had crafted. That night, as snow began to fall outside the window of their bedroom, Daisy nursed Lucy while Luke watched, his expression one of perfect contentment. Happy? He asked softly. Daisy smiled at him over their daughter's head. Completely, though I do wonder sometimes. What became of James Harrington, the man whose cruel joke brought us together? Luke's expression darkened momentarily, then cleared. Last I heard, he was working as a stable hand in Laramie, couldn't get hired as a foreman anywhere after word spread about what he'd done. I should thank him, Daisy mused. Luke looked startled. Thank him for abandoning you, for leading me to you, Daisy clarified. If he had been waiting at that station as promised, I would have married a man incapable of true kindness or honesty. Instead, I found you. Luke moved to sit beside her on the bed, his arm encircling her shoulders as they both gazed down at their drowsing daughter. Then I should thank him too, he whispered, for giving me the greatest gifts of my life. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the Double L ranch in pristine white. Inside, warmed by love and the promise of the future, Daisy Lancaster reflected that sometimes the most meandering paths led to the most beautiful destinations. From abandoned bride to beloved wife and mother, her journey had been unexpected but perfect in its own way, and it had all begun with a cowboy riding in, shouting her name.